Hi, everyone. Officially welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know people are tuning in from all over, but wherever it is that you're tuning in from, thank you so much for joining us virtually today. My name is Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading on legacy. We'll be hearing from Brett Shapiro reading from Henry's version, released on August 20th. John Manuel reading from In Pursuit of the Giant Sable Antelope, released September 24th, and James Gilbert reading from Reunion by the Lake, released October 15th. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website. That's atmospherepress.com/books. I'm also going to put some links in the chat here for everybody. So those will go directly to each book on our website. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, just go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. Please do stay muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to use the chat for praise and comments in addition to questions. And one last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. If you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it, so submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting Brett, John, and Jim today. We're going to start off with our first reader, who is Brett Shapiro. Brett is an American writer and the author of two novels, Late in the Day, released 2022, and Those Around Him, released 2019. His best-selling memoir, L'Intruso, was published in Italy, where he lived for 25 years, and it later became an award-winning film and theatrical production. He's the author of two children's books, one of which was the recipient of Austria's National Book Award, and his short stories have been performed in theaters throughout Italy. He's a veteran writer for the United Nations and currently lives by the beach on Cape Cod and in Florida. In Henry's version, which we'll be hearing from today, Henry feels the gentle knock of mortality at his door. With his future narrowed, Henry asks himself, why do we remember what we remember? And how do we weave it together to shape a twilight version of life that, when all is said and nearly done, feels fully lived? With that, let's welcome Brett.
Thank you so much, Hayla. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to start, I decided to just start from the very beginning of the book. And that way I don't have to provide any context and I don't risk giving any spoiler alerts. So I'm going to read a little bit from the opening chapter of part 1, and then I'll skip and read a bit more from chapter 3 of part 1. Excuse me. The main character, Henry, is at this point in his trajectory, he's verging on adolescence. Let's say that. Okay? Okay. Am I asked my mother when I was 12 or 13. I don't remember. I'm not even sure that I actually asked her. I do remember her eyes, though. They didn't shy away from looking directly into mine whenever I talked to her about things I thought might make her angry. I liked to look at them, but not this time. My best friend Donnie told me he'd asked his mom the same question. You know what she had to say? He said. She said, no. That's it. Like I was asking her something that she always said no to. Like, can I drive the car up and down the driveway to practice again? But then she squeezed me so hard I forgot it was supposed to be a hug. Cripes. Donnie looked like his mom. Red hair, pale skin, face flecked with freckles, straight eyebrows that barely had a space between them. That he would ask her such a question seems stupid to me. So stupid that he didn't really ask her at all. That he was just trying to relate when I told him I wondered whether I was adopted. We continued playing tetherball in his large backyard. As hard as I smacked the ball with my open fist to make it coil tightly around the pole, The questions stuck to me like the sticky strips that the adults in the neighborhood hung on their front porches in summer to catch flying insects with. We kids gathered around the strips to watch a variety of bugs as they ripped their legs off trying to free themselves from the amber-colored glue. "Look at those fly strips," my mother would say. "Like Shirley Temple curls, except they kill." My mother, Edith, spent hours tending to her thick waves of jet black hair. She talked a lot about her hair too, and used the word unruly so much that I assumed it was a normal everyday word. She had a fixed appointment every 2 weeks at the beauty parlor with Dolores, the owner. "I love the way she gets rid of the dead ends," she said to me, if she happened to be coming through the back door after her appointment while I was in the kitchen rummaging for a snack, preferably a bag of beer pretzels or cheese curls. "She takes small sections of hair and twists them between her fingers until they're tight like a twig, and then she passes her Bic lighter up and down the twig to burn off the hair ends that stick out, the ones that are split in two, the dead ends. Ugh, all that death on my head. What a stink." She'd go about her usual business, fluffing her hair up with her hands to make Dolores's creation last longer. I didn't notice any difference. To me, she looked the same, and I wondered why she made those bi-weekly appointments with Dolores. The other mothers in the neighborhood didn't look that much different when they came back from the beauty parlor either. Most of them went to Dolores, too. I didn't get all the fuss and didn't care. Every time my mother returned, she was perky and carefree. I could count on it. It was comforting to be able to count on certain things happening, especially when they had to do with happiness. I had to have been adopted. The fact that my hair was red didn't help. It wasn't as fiery red as Donnie's. Still, I was the one everyone in school called Reds. How he managed to avoid being the one called Reds was beyond me. Probably had to do with him being cool and sure of himself despite his hair. Someone not to mess with, someone to easily fall in love with. He was my best friend. I didn't see him all that much, but he was on my mind all the time. I hoped I was on his too. All right, I'm going to skip to chapter 3. Donnie wasn't adopted. He didn't need to tell me. Looking at him, you could see right away and everywhere the imprint of his mom, but with lots of bits of his father. The bump on the top of his nose, the sliver of space between the upper front teeth, the downward sloped shoulders that arched back when he walked, and the slightly bowed legs, which made me picture a heart, until I heard other boys call them cowboy legs. They weren't making fun of him. They envied his cowboy legs. I did too. I wondered if some of the other boys were in love with him. When Donnie told me that he asked his mom if he was adopted, I said, "Why did you ask her?" "I was bored. She was getting on my nerves. I wanted to get on hers." "What did she say?" She had to have said no. Still, I was curious to hear how she would have said it. Mrs. Armstrong was all about tenderness and comfort. Their house smelled like homemade baked goods, even in the bathroom. Our bathroom smelled like pine sol. I imagined her saying something like, "Of course not, my sweet, silly boy," and then mussing up his hair to reassure him that she loved his red mop and everything else about him before she scooted him off to play with some of the games his parents bought him that my parents never bought me. I wondered sometimes whether I was drawn to Donnie because of all the toys he had. Deep down, I didn't believe that. We didn't spend much time indoors. Walls made him restless. His restlessness made me awkward. He was in his element outdoors, where he could breathe and I could trail him, hoping that his way of being a guy would spread to me. "What do you think she said?" That's when he told me that she said no and hugged him too hard. "Good for you." "What's so good about it? I wanted to stir up a little trouble." "Well, then you should have asked her something else, jerk," I said. I'd never called him a jerk before. I was terrified I'd gone too far. "You never know," he said. "Come on, you know, or else you wouldn't have asked her." "Well, who's being the jerk now?" he said. "What's the big deal?" I got up to leave. Why did you even bother asking her? His face was tight and hard, as if all the water it contained, which was a lot, our science teacher had told us, had been sucked out of him and risen into the atmosphere where it would migrate at the whim of the wind and deposit itself elsewhere, far away. His upper lip, full and red like his hair, was reduced to a razor-thin line. I had to get away from him so badly that I turned down his offer to play Monopoly. Come on, you can have the cannon this time, he said as I headed for the front door. That's okay. I opened the door and peered into the gray and damp outdoors. The rain had subsided to a drizzle mist, and the cloud formations were floating west, away from us. He would never love me, even if I let him have Marvin Gardens or Boardwalk. Who's being the jerk? He called as I walked down the driveway between his mother's Cutlass Supreme and his father's white Lincoln Continental. I envied families that had cars like that. Their achievements were so abundant inside the house that they must be spilled onto the driveway. My parents had matching Dodge Darts, one pewter and the other a lighter shade of gray that didn't have a special name that I was aware of, drab. I sped up, Donnie and his parents' drizzling cars vanishing in the Donnie and his parents' dazzling cars vanished in the obscuring drizzle. By the time I reached the bottom of his driveway, I was missing him. I shouldn't have walked out. He shouldn't have closed the front door after shouting at me. But that's what we did to each other. When I reached the street, I considered turning around to see if he'd opened his front door to look for me, in which case I would have come up with something to say to bring him back into my life. I could have told him about the blue box and my birth certificate with Overland Park, Kansas inscribed on the second line. I could have asked him what he thought about it, even though he'd have said something stupid. But I didn't turn around. It was getting darker. I didn't have a clue about what could tear us further apart or draw us closer together. I kept going. In the familiar path of darkness that took me from his house to mine, I tried to understand how someone could come to mean something so important as oxygen for someone else, and why Donnie, of all people, was that for me. What did we have in common? Tetherball. Our passion for it was equal, whatever the reason, if passion needs a reason. We spent most of our hours between when school let out and dinner was ready, smacking the ball with open palms and watching how tightly the rope wound against the pole that Donnie's dad had fixed into the earth like a phallic totem meant to withstand the ravages of time. We were in for the shared effort and exhaustion, the delirious release of energies pounding away at our insides like dogs in a frenzy of heat. For me, our bouts of tetherball were a relief so exquisite that they had to be about intensity and intimacy, a state of wordlessness. I was convinced that Donnie had to feel it too. Our tetherball sessions passed in the blink of an eye, even when they were entering their second hour and were made to come to an abrupt end when his mother called, "Dinner's ready!" And only then did we notice it was getting dark outside. Without her summons, we might have continued smacking the ball into the dead of night when we couldn't see where the ball was going, in the same way that we hit the ball in total silence when we had so much we could have been saying. A second call, "Dinner's on the table!" How could it be so late so fast? We tallied the score. It made no difference to me who was winning. I waited for his hand to slap mine, regardless of who won. Later, he'd say, I'd be left with a sweet, stinging sensation on my hand from the slap, and a bit more of history with Donnie accrued. I was content. When we weren't playing tetherball, we didn't talk all that much either. We might have, if I'd had the courage, but I was too afraid of losing him by talking too much and letting slip impulses and unformed thoughts that might push him away. That's what a best friend was, someone you knew you could confess to most, and were afraid of losing the most. Someone you knew you could talk to but were quiet with, hoping that they'd hear all the words that weren't being spoken. Donnie made it so easy. When I nattered on too long, he had no qualms about saying to me, "Will you shut up already? Cripes." By the time I arrived at my neighbor's driveway, 4 driveways from his, the darkness had swallowed Donnie's house and my ambivalence over not telling him about the birth certificate. I decided I'd done the right thing. Donnie was competitive. It was his trademark. He was used to winning, and his victories made me proud to be his best friend. I prayed, even if I couldn't understand how or why he might possibly consider me to be the same thing for him. It couldn't be out of pity. Winners didn't sympathize with losers. They fed off them. I'd seen Donnie bully enough scrawny guys to get that. He wasn't one to go all soft. I hated thinking about my best friend that way, but I couldn't but think that way. That's who he was. What I didn't understand was whether he was my best friend because I knew him so well, or because he remained a mystery despite how much I knew him. Where and how did love come about, I asked myself. From the light or from the dark? Then I reminded myself that I didn't get around to asking my mother if I was adopted. The front door was unlocked when I arrived home. I went upstairs to my bedroom. Closing my bedroom door behind me, I decided that Donnie shouldn't be my best friend anymore, best or otherwise. He gave me pangs of hunger constantly. My resolve was short-lived. By the time I flopped on my bed, the prospect of not spending time with him again was unbearable. I couldn't imagine getting through my days without Donnie's way of being, without the fragrance of him goading me to take in deep breaths of him. At home, we washed with Irish Spring. The bars of marbleized green and white were nestled on each soap dish embedded in the walls above the bathroom sinks and bathtubs. The soap left a long-lasting after scent of industrial-strength disinfectant mixed with something earthy. My mother made me shower every night. After school, when I boarded the school bus to go home, I had the habit of tilting my head toward my armpits to sniff for signs of BO. Nothing. Even after gym class on warm days in September and June. I blamed it on the Irish Spring's secret formula, but deep down I feared that my inability to produce BO was due to my not being man enough. Donnie managed to exude his own smell even in the winter months when he didn't sweat at all. I wondered whether his red hair had something to do with it. One afternoon, I asked him whether he used Irish Spring. Irish String? He replied. What's that? No, Irish Spring. Oh, he paused. What's that? You should know, you're Irish. He repeated, what is it? Oh, never mind, forget it. Shower time, then off to bed with you, my mother called that night at 8 o'clock sharp. The call was for me, not for Adrian. My sister took at least 2 showers a day. Excuse me. Long ones, so long that my mother would trek to the bathroom door and holler, get out already unless you want to pay the water bill. Adrian believed that cleanliness was crucial to get boys. I thought smelling fresh and fragrant kept them away. Okay, Ma. On shower night, it didn't matter where in the house I was at 8 o'clock or what I was doing. I didn't put up a fight or ask for an extension. I expected my mother to call out to me at that hour with those 8 words, and she expected to hear my 2-word reply. Both of us knew what it meant. The onset of evening was arriving, the interval when activities conducted in sharp light ceded to forces of the darkening sky. Daylight defined borders, darkness blotted them out. The interval between was neither here nor there. Perfect for the adoption question.
Right. Thank you so much, Brett. I feel like that was uncomfortably relatable almost of adolescence and that kind of just constant anxiety and introspection that you do as a younger person. So thank you so much for sharing that section of the book with us.
Well, thank you very
So
much.
yeah, of course. Reading next today is John Manuel. John grew up in Gates Mills, Ohio, and graduated from Yale University and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He now lives in Durham, North Carolina, with his wife, Kathy Murphy. John has published a memoir, The Canoeist, from Jefferson Press, and 3 novels, Hope Valley from Red Lodge Press, The Lower Canyons from Atmosphere Press, and Solitario, also from Atmosphere Press. For more information on John's writing, see www.jsmanuel.com. During In Pursuit of the Giant Sable Antelope, the novel we'll be hearing from today, 18-year-old Walker Scoville is in the midst of a safari in southern Africa when his tour leader catches wind of the sighting of a rare antelope on the volatile border between Namibia and Angola. Walker, along with his fellow travelers, embarks on an increasingly perilous journey through Africa to pursue this never before photographed creature. John, take it away.
Thanks, Hala. Yeah, the theme of tonight's session is legacy, which I think is an interesting question for a lot of us here entering the last quarter of our lives. And one of my characters, Cecil Covington, is definitely concerned with his legacy. He's a 60-year-old British wildlife photographer. He goes to Africa every year to photograph wildlife, but he also takes a group of boys with him to pay his way. And in truth be known, he really enjoys entertaining the boys more than making films. And as a result, he's not a very successful filmmaker commercially, but he desperately wants to do something to earn himself a measure of fame. And in my book, set in 1975, Cecil and his boys are camped in Victoria Falls, which is, I mean, you know, it's a very popular tourist destination in Zimbabwe. And he hears a rumor of the sighting of this rare antelope, the giant sable. The trouble is, it's hundreds of miles away from where they're camped, and it's in a area that's quickly becoming a war zone as African rebels out of their base in Angola are seeking to overthrow the white-ruled government of Southwest Africa or Namibia. So Cecil definitely needs more information on where exactly this antelope was sighted, and he's told he can find that in the previous day's newspaper. So in this scene, he leaves his group of boys at the campground and goes to the famous Victoria Falls Hotel in hopes of finding the previous day's paper. The receptionist tells him to go rummage through the dumpster out back to see if he can find it. And he's in the process of doing that when an African waiter accidentally dumps a pile of garbage on his head. "Are you blind?" Cecil said. "No, sir, but what are you doing in there?" "I was looking for yesterday's paper. Now help me out." Cecil struggled to his feet and brushed the garbage out of his hair. "How do I look?" "Fine, sir." He went back inside, holding the folded newspaper and smiling at the receptionist. He strolled through the lounge where an elderly woman waved her nose as he passed. He arrived at the back terrace with its famous view of the Zambezi River and the railway trestles spanning the gorge. He took a seat at a table and waved to the African waiter. "Might I have a fried egg and some sausage?" Cecil said. "Yes, sir." "And I'll have some tea, a bit of lemon." "Yes, sir." The waiter left. He unfolded the Herald. "2 police dead in Southwest African blast," the headline blared. Phooey on that. He flipped to the second page and the third. There it was. "Rare antelope spotted on Kavango River." Police on patrol near the town of Mbane spotted what they claim was a giant sable antelope grazing on the Angolan side of the river. The giant sable is an extremely rare subspecies of the more common sable antelope. It is found only in Angola. Wildlife biologists suspect that civil war in the newly independent nation may have driven the animal out of its traditional range. The waiter arrived with his breakfast. "Lovely, thanks." Cecil flipped back to the front page and its disturbing headline about the killing of the policeman. Their vehicle had hit a mine in the road, killing the 2 officers aboard. Officials suspected that the mine had been planted by members of the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, operating out of Angola. In response, the government called on the South African Defense Force to help defend the area. Christ, these rebels were becoming a real nuisance. The terrace began to fill with other patrons, a bunch of overweight elderly white tourists in identical freshly ironed safari outfits. No doubt they thought of themselves as quite adventurous. Took a sunrise cruise on the upper Zambezi, did you? Spotted a bloat of hippos? Then again, that could be him in not too many years. He'd just turned 60 and surely wouldn't be doing much past 65. And what would he be then? A has-been tour leader, alone, an outcast? He finished his breakfast and pushed the plate aside. The waiter arrived and asked if he wanted anything else. No, he did not. He paid the bill and walked back through the hotel, passing beneath the mounted heads of lion and buffalo. Magnificent specimens, these. He read the plaques. Shot by Yank Ellen, July 1901. Shot by William Charles Baldwin, August 1865. These big game hunters had left their mark for the ages. But what mark would he leave for all his years in Africa? There was his discovery of Livingstone's initials, or perhaps the rediscovery. Someone at the Royal Geographic Society was bound to say, so-and-so saw them at such and such a year. But he was quite certain no one had filmed a giant sable antelope, not alive and not in the wild. This would be his mark. One of the other principal characters is Walker Scoville. He's a 17-year-old boy, too young to be thinking about legacy, but he is concerned with living a full life. And right now he's going through a kind of an existential crisis. What's the meaning of life? Is there a God? And you might say he's looking for a new religion. And he latches on to David Thoreau and his vision that nature is the savior of man. And so what better way to experience nature than to go on a safari in Africa, especially with Cecil Covington. Cecil doesn't restrict his clients the way most safari operators do, forced to stay in your car when you see an animal and having fancy meals in formal lodges. Cecil camps out in the bush and lets his boys roam. And here we see how this frees Walker to live in the moment. Cecil drove back to the track and followed it along a bluff overlooking the river. He stopped and stepped out to study the terrain. A lovely woodland of mopane, kyat, and Zambezi teak trees sloped down to the river, bordered by papyrus and cattails. All manner of birds, cormorant, fish eagle, and yellow-billed stork, perched in the trees overhead. This should do nicely, Cecil said. Walker unloaded his gear, all the while casting an eye toward the river. This was a gamey-looking spot. Rather than waiting for the group, he felt like going out alone. Do you mind if I go down to the river? He said to Cecil. You don't want to wait for the rest of us? I'm not going far. Be careful, there's liable to be crocodiles along the banks. Walker worked his way down the sandy slope beneath the scattered trees. Reaching the river, he came upon a well-used game trail. Piles of elephant dung spotted the trail in between the oval tracks, as large and smooth as a pie plate. He stared across the river. Upstream against the far shore, he made out a series of brown humps half submerged in the water. The humps sprouted eyes, ears, nostrils. Hippos, 8 or 10 of them. His heart raced. Should he go back and tell the others? No. He'd vowed to go out alone, and this was his reward. He followed the game trail along the bank until he was directly across from the pod. It appeared to be a family unit, both large and small animals. Could they see him? He didn't know, but they seemed undisturbed. He took a few shots with his camera and settled down to watch. The nature films he'd seen featured hippo bulls engaged in mortal combat, massive jaws agape. But these animals were happy just to sit. Most animals were happy just to sit. Minutes passed without any movement. He lowered his camera and leaned back on his elbows. The sun warmed his face. It was good to be alone. All the hours on the road in camp, touring the parks, were spent with other people. Anytime they saw something worth photographing, the boys would jostle for position. It was obscene in a way. Each of them thought his photograph was exceptional, yet they were probably close to identical. Here, alone on the riverbank, he had a chance at something he could call his own. As if on cue, a malachite kingfisher landed on a reed before him. It was the most beautiful bird he'd ever seen, fiery red beak, blue-green forehead, copper breast. He was sure it would flee if he moved, so he forced himself to be still. The bird spotted something in the river, flew out, hovered, and dove. It returned to the same reed, the exact same reed, with a minnow in his mouth. What a shot this would make. In the slowest motion he could muster, Walker raised his camera and turned the focus ring. The kingfisher came into view, rising and falling on the wind. Wait for it. Wait for it. The wind died and the bobbing slowed. He pressed the shutter. Got it. All right, my third character, this is the last reading I'll do, is Patrick Hangula. He is a native of Southwest Africa, or Namibia as we know it. He works as a driver for a safari outfitter, taking wealthy white clients to fancy lodges in the national parks. He dreams of someday owning his own safari company in a free country where blacks and whites have equal standing. But for now, he needs to take the jobs he's assigned, and this one ends up being altogether different than he bargained for, following some crazy white man trying to find an antelope in a war zone. In this scene, they are looking for some place to camp in the village near where the antelope was last seen. Patrick followed Cecil as they drove to the end of town facing the river. A rutted side road led to a neighborhood of tin-roofed huts along the bluff. He put the Land Rover in four-wheel drive and inched forward. Black faces stared at the improbable visitors. In an empty lot, children chased a soccer ball made of plastic bags bound up in twine. They came to the end of the road, to an open area overlooking the river. Cecil stepped out and surveyed the scene. It was strewn with garbage, but could conceivably fit their group. "Could you ask one of these people if we could camp here?" Cecil said to Patrick. "I rather doubt they speak English." Patrick spotted a woman peering out the doorway of the nearest hut. He addressed her in Solotsi. "Shangwe Ima, can we camp over there?" Yes, they could camp there. "Fabulous," Cecil said. "Boys, unload the cars." The group kicked aside tin cans and beer bottles and spread out their cots. Cecil strolled to the edge of the bluff and gazed at the river. On the shore beneath the huts were several canoes. A black man sat by one mending his fishing net. "Patrick, come here. I'd like to ask this man something." They sidled down the bluff and walked over to the man. Cecil introduced himself. "Hello, I'm Cecil Covington. I'm from England." "Wayakura," the man said. "Welcome. I've come all the way here to photograph the giant sable antelope." He held his hands atop his head, imitating the pair of horns. "Do you know this animal? I've heard one has been seen across the river." Patrick translated. "Yes, he knows of this creature. He's seen it." "He's seen it? Where exactly?" The man pointed upriver. "He saw it 2 days ago," Patrick said, "walking along the far shore." Cecil's eyes sparkled. "Ask him if he will take me across the river in his canoe. Tell him I will pay him 30 rands. The man shook his head. "No, he will not take you," Patrick said. "It is forbidden to cross the river." "Tell him 50. The man was unmoved. "He will not do it," Patrick said. "He says he could have his canoe confiscated, might be put in jail." "Bloody hell. All right, let's go drop the car off." Leaving the boys at camp, Patrick and Cecil drove both vehicles to the auto shop. Patrick parked the damaged Land Rover and climbed into the front seat of Cecil's. On the ride back, Cecil was silent. The man looked terribly sad, his shoulders hunched, his thin lips in a frown. He'd come all this way with such high hopes, and to know that fame resided just across the river. Patrick reached out and patted him on the shoulder. "I am sad too, boss." Cecil teared. "Yes, thank you. We've tried our best, haven't we?" They turned into the muddy lane and drove past the line of huts. Cecil brightened. "Perhaps I should ask one of the other boat owners if he would take me." "No one will take you, boss. The boats are too expensive, and they do not want to risk their lives." "What if I offered to buy one?" "A canoe?" "Yes, and paddle it over myself." "You could not paddle one of these canoes alone, boss. They are too heavy." "What if you come with me? Would you be willing to do that?" Patrick felt the blood rising in his head. "Boss, this puts me in a difficult position." "Yes, of course, I shouldn't have asked." What a manipulator this man was. But what choice did he, Patrick, really have? If he were to say no, Cecil would be crushed. The man would live the rest of his life thinking he'd had a real shot at fame. And he, Patrick, as well. This was his shot. "If you buy a canoe, I will go with you," Patrick said. Cecil smiled. "Oh, jolly good. I knew you'd come around."
Thank you so much, John. And thank you for really kind of setting the stage for what's to come. I think also kind of jumping around a little bit. I think that was a great way to show us these different facets. So, yeah, thank you so much for that reading. Our final reader for today is James Gilbert. As a true son born under the sign of Gemini, Jim has had twin careers. The first was as professor of history, where he published 11 books on American culture and retired as distinguished university professor at the University of Maryland. The second is as a writer of fiction and the author of 6 and now 7 novels, 3 of which comprise the Amanda Pennyworth mystery series. 2 of his short stories have won prizes from the F. Scott Fitzgerald Literary Contest. He currently resides outside Washington, D.C. In Reunion by the Lake, the novel we'll hear from today, Richard Collins knew he had only a short time to live, and it's vital to inform his 3 sons. Gathering in the house by the lake, Richard anticipates the disclosure of his final wishes to be a solemn affair. However, he can't predict the tumultuous reactions each son would have to his revelation. We'll hear more of the story now from Jim himself.
Thanks very much, Shayla. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon and be a part of these impressive 2 other storytellers. I want to begin by just quoting the preface of this novel, just to give you a sense of my thinking. It's from a poem by Dylan Thomas, and it's just the few words, "Do not go gentle." If you know that poem, there's a lot more to it, but this seemed to me to be very appropriate for what this novel is about. My 2 main characters that I'll be talking about today and reading from are Grace and Richard Collins. They have retired to a retirement community in Southern Illinois by a lake, and Richard is formerly a top lawyer in Chicago, and Grace is his wife, who's had a very fine education, but never did anything but raise his 3 sons. The drama of the novel is the confrontation of the 3 sons with 2 earth-shattering realities. One is the imminent death of Richard, who announces to his sons that he has a terminal heart disease. And secondly, he reveals to them the terms of his will. And these terms are, like many wills, an effort to control the future, even after he's died. And the terms of this will is going to be very distressing. And in the novel, it will explode and reveal all of the tensions and difficulties of a family that has never been anything but troubled. The scene I'm going to read from, first of all, is in the very beginning of the novel, where Richard and Grace are having finished dinner, and she is about to clear off the table. Neither of them ventured another word until Richard stood carefully, gripping the arms of his chair to pull himself up. "You wouldn't mind pouring me a drink, would you? My hand shakes too much. Couldn't eat anything, and drinking is hard enough." "Of course," she said, putting down her plate and glancing at the cabinet on the wall behind her. "The usual? With an ice cube. And yourself?" "Yes, I'll bring the glasses into the living room. Can you manage?" "Probably." She retreated to the kitchen, carrying her dish and his untouched dinner, and shoveled it into the trash bin beneath the sink. As she rinsed the plates, she wondered why she was still trying to change his mind about the will, why she picked at the edges of his determination when she knew he was adamant and would never give in. She had to keep reminding herself that his physical weakness and his decline had done nothing to weaken his resolve, this broken man with an unbroken determination. Entering the living room, Richard eased himself onto the couch, balancing with his right hand on the arm and slowly dropping onto the seat. He thought he might reach over and turn on the lamp, but decided to sit in the semi-dark for the moment. As he looked around, it reminded him, for no good reason that he could imagine, of the first time they had looked at the house. He remembered that during the afternoon showing, he hadn't realized the possibilities until they began to emerge gradually, like a slow, brightening illumination, as they toured each room with a garrulous real estate agent. Such a perfect place for a long retirement, she had bubbled on after they finished their visit. She continued to talk as she swept a leathery hand in a semicircle, as if she had to prompt their eyes to admire every corner of the living room where they were standing. "And there's the lake and a private dock. Of course you'll get a boat. Almost everyone around here has one. Or you can just fish over the edge if you want. And the sunsets, scrumptious, glorious. Lots of bedrooms for when your children visit. I'm right about that, aren't I? 3 sons? And how many grandchildren? How wonderful," she added, answering her own question before they could answer. He said nothing but scowled at her for pretending she could anticipate his retirement days, instructing him as if he didn't know any better about how to enjoy his surroundings or spend his time. He looked to Grace for some agreement with his contempt for this unsolicited sales pitch, unnecessary because they had already decided, and worse because somehow the words in her mouth sullied the pleasures he anticipated. But his wife's look had been a mute refusal to be drawn into his displeasure or his anger. It was just like her to be accommodating and friendly when a caustic remark would silence the agent and allow him his own private contemplation of the years to come. Her indulgent smile told him to remain silent. They hadn't hesitated to buy this house on the lake. It was located in a relatively new development around an artificial body of water, fed by damming up the meandering Seminole Creek. Their property was almost an acre, mostly lawn, and a few tall birch trees with their shaggy bark and filigree green foliage. All the new houses were situated on large tracts of land running down to the water, separated far enough to maintain a friendly privacy, although none was as large as theirs. Not that their old house in the suburbs south of Chicago hadn't been pleasant or long enough or large enough, but Richard wanted something different, not because he disliked that location, but because he insisted that retirement should mean a change of venue. And yet, as it turned out, and as he hadn't told her, he certainly did not intend to cut himself off from the law. It had settled into his bones, and an occasional case that didn't involve a court appearance, some will or a contract, was enough to keep him in the practice. Not that Grace approved. She didn't. She had wanted him to cut ties with legal matters entirely. Probably, he suspected, because she was jealous, or maybe she just wanted his abiding attention. But she had hoped that their lives would amend. In fact, something had changed profoundly after they had moved into the new house. He had come to suspect that relinquishing his partnership at the firm had altered the dynamics of their marriage and the terms of their relationship, even if he was not inclined to admit it. Theirs had never been a contract between equivalents, but he did not realize the degree to which he would increasingly come to depend upon her and allow her to arrange their day, especially now with his illness. She did so enthusiastically, and he sometimes wondered if that was what she had anticipated and wanted all along. It had become apparent to him that they had become entirely changed persons, living together now for the first time without any of the freshness of novelty and reckless passion long gone, and he feared without much love. Maybe, he mused, that had happened gradually, becoming obviously only when they moved to the new house. So this was what growing old together meant, he thought. Uncomfortable for a moment, he shifted his position on the couch and tried to see into the dining room if she was coming. When he first heard that saying, it sounded as ominous as it turned out to be, only different and wholly unexpected. He hadn't realized or thought until lately that aging with someone simply meant that life would become a routine, interrupted by moments of noticeable decline, a falling away until the essence of a relationship meant the increasing dependence upon each other and the androgyny of two sexless bodies bound together in graying frailty. Was it a slow dying of everything that was the meaning of this phrase? And he had ultimately come to understand that growing old together meant diminishing alongside someone, but each with a different and unequal pace. That was a surprise. Somehow, she seemed to accept her situation and thrive, whereas his aging was measured only in brief plateaus, followed by a sudden pitch into further decline. The worst part, and the unexpected part, had been the disappearance of boundaries and the cloistered spaces that he had so carefully guarded his whole life, just like the expanse he had purchased for privacy around their house. But now, even his body and all its functions had become public objects, pried and prodded by doctors, monitored on charts and graphs, and shared and worried over by his wife. Even worse, he knew he was the whispered object of commentary among friends and family. Most surprisingly, his weakness appeared to give her a new kind of strength in their relationship. And although she tried to be careful and evade the sharp edges of his moods, this insidious transfer of power grieved him and made him lash out, sometimes in anger that he no longer tried to control. He had frequently complained to her that he wanted it to be over, to rush into oblivion, but now that it soon would be, all he wanted was enough time to set everything right, to explain himself and justify himself. He believed it was his duty to exercise this one final influence over the lives of his 3 sons and leave them the just legacy that they each deserved. After that bleak moment, let me read something toward the end of the novel, where Grace is contemplating all of the events that have transpired after Richard has told his sons of his legacy, and they have departed. The next morning, the passing storm delivered a day that was bright and crisp, with only a few white clouds hanging motionless in the luminous blue sky. Grace was up early because sleep had been impossible. She couldn't remember a night spent like that. It surprised her that what kept her awake wasn't the events of the day, or even the worry about Richard and the bitterness caused by the revelation of his terrible will. Instead, when she closed her eyes, there was only uncomfortable memories, haunting recollections of the times she had snapped at friends or her children, or had done something she deeply regretted and couldn't undo. Why this? Why this rehearsal of moments when she felt such guilt? And everything was as vivid and inexorable as a nightmare. She didn't understand, except it must be her unconscious fear that somehow she was at fault for failing to keep Richard from making his strange and unfair bequests. Maybe she considered if she had put her disagreement differently, or if she had been more forceful, she might have dissuaded him. Yes, and if she had asserted herself from the very beginning, even when they had first planned to marry, things might have been different. But how could that have been possible? She didn't want to admit that their relationship had always been at his convenience, but maybe it was. And now the family that she had so cautiously nurtured was being ripped apart. Was it her fault? Her weakness? Why should she blame herself? That law had always come first for him. How could that have mattered? It was a life she had chosen and a man she loved. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you for those readings. And I think that really touched so well on the theme of today, but also the content of the book, obviously, and the voice and everything that can be kind of explored in there. So thank you so much for that. At this time, we do have some time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. We do have a question. This first one is for all 3 authors. This question is, all 3 of your stories seem to tap into the concept of retrospection and personal growth. Based on that, what is a message you would like for your readers to take away from your book? I'm wondering if we could go in reading order. So, Brett, do you want to start us off with this one?
Ooh, that's a heavy question for this time of day. Um, I guess, one of the things I was hoping to be able to accomplish that feeds into that question is just this idea of being very aware of how we are reacting to whatever it is that happens to be happening to us. So that we come out with a feeling of richness of the experience that is taking place at that moment, rather than being insensitive to that particular experience and then having to reflect on it in let's say, a questioning or problematic kind of way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that kind of. Oh,
yeah.
sorry. If someone
No,
else wants to jump in. I couldn't see
no,
if that was John or Jim, but
yeah,
whoever,
I
feel
think
free.
that speaks well to what I would want to say, which is I think you need to be open to things not working out the way you'd intended, uh, but then not closing up, but rather being open to learning, to other possibilities. The character of Walker is hoping to go to Africa and just see a lot of cool animals and take pictures, and he does that. But in addition, there are these interpersonal conflicts and external political events that are upsetting. But if you're willing to listen to that, then you can grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, also, I want to give you a chance to chime in as well.
Okay, well, I'll have to tell you something that I didn't read, but which is the denouement of the novel, and that really is how a deeply disturbed family eventually comes together to confront all of the problems that have lurked through their history. And while the ending is it to some degree a hopeful ending, not everything is settled because life is not like that. And I tried to create a world that was entirely believable, with people struggling to come to terms with some of the real difficulties and tragedies of life.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's always this balance, of the heavier and the lighter things and that interplay. And I think we could really see from all of those readings how much that plays into so much of the stories. So I think that's really wonderful to be able to see. This next question, this is for John from Bob. I very much enjoyed your reading. What's your view on the quest for legacy, and does it goad us to be
I'm
more
going to take just 1
accomplished,
minute to explain why your contribution right now.
more altruistic, or something else?
I think the quest for legacy is a slippery thing, and I think for it to really be meaningful and lasting, you have to be devoted to it for a considerable length of time, and you can't just rush at the end of your life. And I mean, you can write a big check or sign on for Habitat or whatever, and that may be important in some ways, but it's not really going to cement your legacy, I think, in the way that some people hope it would.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a slippery thing almost.
Yeah.
Another question, this is for Jim from Kathy. Many of us have had aging parents who have wondered what was the purpose of their long lives, only to be told by their children how grateful we are for all that they have given us as they raised us. To what extent do you think we have we who have children feel that providing and caring for children is not enough?
Oh, that's a that's a huge question.
It's a big one, yeah.
I'll be really brief. I think I think my sense is that the relationships between parents and children are never enough. That we always, whichever side we're on as parent or child, that we don't feel that we have gotten to know our parents or our children as well as we might have. We haven't known, we might feel we haven't given as much as we might have. It's a kind of, let me put it this way, it's a kind of loving regret that I think binds parents and children together, particularly at the kind of moment that I'm talking about when death is imminent.
Yeah, it's this constant state of introspection and what you, I mean, really with the legacy aspect, obviously what you're leaving behind. So big question, but that was a really great response. Thank you. This is our last question of the night. It's sent in anonymously. This is for Brett. I was interested to hear that you've written not only for adults, but also for children. Do you have a preferred quote unquote target audience?
The children's books were more whimsical. They were summer projects and they were quirky and light. And I felt that I needed to take a break from the more serious work that I tend to spend my time on. And but I absolutely prefer writing fiction and writing novels. I feel that my voice and my soul seem to get transmitted in the way that I feel is meaningful. And so I prefer audiences who will appreciate, well, the musicality of sentences for one thing, and also some of just these very soft, slight nuances that comprise an everyday life. So that's what I'm striving for.
Yeah, I have to say I love the idea of the musicality of sentences. I think that's such a beautiful way to put that. So just wanted to comment on that. But with that, I just want to say also one more time, thank you to all of our authors for being here with us and bringing your novels to life for us all tonight. So thank you to Brett, John, and Jim for being generous with your time and your words. Um, Everything that you have brought to this, not only the reading, but the Q&A. And thank you to everyone in the audience also for joining us and celebrating these authors with us. Don't forget that you can order Henry's version, In Pursuit of the Giant Sable Antelope and Reunion by the Lake. Reunion by the Lake. And I'll put the links for all three of those in the chat one more time for everybody. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. We'll look forward to hearing from you, but until then, that's it for tonight. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Hala. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.